I'm so amazed that you're an 8th grade teacher.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I really do.
That's a really, really important age. Really
It's
important age.
yeah, they're like bags of hormones and
Yeah.
just emotions,
They
but
probably have stories that, oh
oh
my
yeah.
gosh.
I could talk for days on that.
Yeah.
Welcome to Conversation on Tap, a podcast that seeks to promote intelligent dialogue in an age of echo chambers and self-segregation. Pull up a stool, pour a glass of tasty beer, and join us each week as we discuss all the topics you were told not to discuss in polite company. My name is Jose.
My name is Christina.
And this week I will be joined by the hilarious and faith-filled Jeannie Gaffigan, a producer, writer, actress, mom, and wife to Jim Gaffigan. It's quite the whirlwind conversation, so this will be a 2-part episode. So be sure to come back next week for part 2. But first, babe, you're joining us again. My wife, Christina, here.
Yeah, happy to fill in.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you're here.
Yeah.
So what are we drinking? What do we have?
Well, you, my dear, picked out a wonderful variety box on the Sierra Nevada. I have Wanderland. Wanderland?
Wanderland?
Wanderland.
I think you're stressing the A too much.
Wanderland.
Yeah.
Nectarine ale. Let's see.
It's pretty good.
I'm going to take a swig.
Yeah, while you take a swig of them, that nectarine drink, I'm drinking the Torpedo.
Oh my goodness.
Torpedo Extra IPA. Sierra Nevada, it's really good. Family owned and operated, and apparently argued over.
Argued over?
That's what it says on the bottle.
Interesting.
Yeah, they're out of Chico, California, and Mills River, North Carolina. Huh. North Carolina, the greater of the Carolinas. I've never been to South Carolina, so...
Well, I did basic training in South Carolina, so...
How'd that work out?
Great.
Yeah.
I mean, I fulfilled my duty.
You did. I'm not so sure I would ever want to go to South Carolina. I think the only good thing to come out of South Carolina, no offense, is Stephen Colbert.
Oh my God. They have the most amazing, beautiful sunsets that I've ever seen in my life. And we live in California.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Where we've got beaches
I know.
and sand, and the sun sets in the west. And I have never seen such beautiful sunsets before as South Carolina. So
I apologize to all of you who are from South Carolina. I'm sure it's great.
it's great over there.
They have Lindsey Graham. Not so great. But anyway, thank you, North Carolina, the greater of the Carolinas, for participating in the creation of Sierra Nevada. It's delicious.
And now for the segment of our show that we call Fred Talks. In this segment of our show, Jose and I will each share one thing that we are passionate about for 2 minutes, though we tend to be chatterboxes, so that isn't a strict time limit. This week, Jose will discuss...
Yeah, so this week I will be, as we've discussed, I'll be talking to the wonderful Jeannie Gaffigan.
She is wonderful.
She really is. So because today I'm talking to Jeannie Gaffigan, I thought it would be fun to take a minute and talk about humor in the Bible.
Don't worry, God has a sense of humor. Yeah.
So just to preface this Fred Talk here, much of this comes from reading Father James Martin's book, Between Heaven and Mirth.
Mm.
So this is not my own genius. This is not my own insight.
You've been reading that book for a while, yeah?
Well, I finished that book a long time ago.
Oh, you did? Okay.
But biblical scholars, according to his book, note that Jesus would have actually been quite funny to the people listening to his parables, to his stories, to his, riddles or questions. We, modern readers, we read it and we don't think it's that funny. Part of it is because humor is like time-bound, it's cultural-bound.
Yeah.
That was 2,000 years ago, so some of the humor doesn't really resonate with us.
But humor is in our DNA.
True.
I mean, it's crafted into our DNA. He created us, right? It's unfathomable
Right.
that he's funny.
Oh, for absolutely. That's the whole point. He is funny.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of modern readers sometimes miss the joke.
Yes.
It's sort of like if you go back and you watch The Three Stooges. Some people are like, yeah, it's funny. And some people, like myself, are like, I don't get it. It's not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
The other aspect is that we, the readers, approach the Bible with so much seriousness and reverence that we read these things that are supposed to be funny or witty. We read them with just this solemn tone of voice.
Solemn is the word I was thinking of, for sure.
And so because we're doing that, we just butcher the joke. Right? It's like if you were to read a comedian's joke with this, a very straight, serious tone, the joke would fall flat. But there's also another reason why we sometimes will read the Bible, so seriously. It's because it ends, the Gospels end with Jesus' passion, death, and resurrection. It's kind of like
there's
tragic.
no joking about
There's
that.
no joking in there.
Yeah.
So that will sometimes overshadow the levity.
Yeah.
That kind of precedes that. But we have to remember that Jesus was a man. He walked this earth. He had friends. He lived with his disciples. He walked with them, ate with them. I'm sure he told stories, jokes around the campfire.
Well, okay. People don't like to think of our Lord and Savior as being human in the way where the man had to eat, he had to sleep, he had to poop.
Yep.
I'm sure he farted.
Vomited.
I mean, you name it. So, but I think in most people's minds, they just can't picture Jesus doing any of that.
Right.
And so it kind of dehumanizes him in a way.
Right, and in doing that, dehumanizes us as well, actually.
Yeah.
So Jesus is very charismatic, he's very appealing to people, and part of that is he's funny. So let's just look at a few examples. Take Jesus' admonition to stop being a hypocrite who points out the speck of wood in their brother's eye, but doesn't notice the beam or the plank in their own eye.
Right.
That would have been funny.
Yeah.
Right? Because the twist there is you're pointing out this little tiny speck of wood. Meanwhile, you got a big old hunk and chunk of wood in your own eye.
Right.
Right? That's the twist. Or, for example, think of Nathaniel. He's sitting under a fig tree and someone points out that, Jesus is, the Messiah. And Nathaniel's response is, can anything good come from Nazareth? And Jesus just, instead of being like, do you want to be smoten?
Yeah.
I'm going to smite you?
Right.
You don't speak that way to me.
Stop that. I will smite you.
No, instead he's like, now there's an Israelite without duplicity, without guile. So our embrace of humor, of joy, it's a sign that we're in the presence of God. That's a sign that we are residing in God's peace.
Yeah.
Right? Instead of being anxious or fearful. But it's also a great way to repel the enemy. Right? The devil hates the sound of laughter. He hates happy, joyful people.
Yeah.
Right? As a Christian, we should be laughing and joyful and telling jokes, being humorous. Don't be a sourpuss, as Pope Francis has warned.
Well, I'm Chuckles over here, so according to my family.
All right, babe, what do you got?
Today I'm going to talk about the origin of roller derby. Something that I was very passionate about for a period in my life, and I've never been one to play sports, but roller derby was it for me. I've loved skating, my whole life since I was a little girl, and got to kick some butt on the track. I wanted to talk about it and the origin of it, because not a lot of people know how it got started and all that jazz. So I don't have a lot of time, obviously, but I just wanted to kind of hit on a few things with it. So roller derby dates back to the 1920s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine roller skates back in the 20s. They're aluminum wheels and...
Well, have you seen their bicycles back then with a
Well,
giant front wheel and tiny little back wheel?
yeah, there's that.
Yeah.
Roller derby was originally used to describe roller skate races. In the late 1930s, Leo Seltzer, like the drink, had a touring competition called Transcontinental Roller Derby, and it was marathon race skating. So, I mean, they would skate miles and miles. And that was on a raised track. And then it evolved into a more physical competition, emphasizing the skater collisions and falls.
Which is more fun.
I guess, I mean, who doesn't want to see some women, smacking each other around on the track there?
Yeah.
You can't smack, but, maybe with your booty and your hips.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll watch it.
Back in the 1930s, the late 1930s, when this was getting started, it was absolutely unheard of for women to have a full contact sport. Absolutely unheard of.
Right.
So this was the one sport that women were on an equal playing field as the men.
Yeah.
And it's been that. It's always been that throughout the decade. I think that's pretty cool.
That is.
It's a very physical and mental sport as well. There's lots of strategy involved. I'm not going to get into the inner workings of exactly how it works because I'll be here all day. Okay, so the short and skinny of it is it's 5-on-5. So you got 2 teams, 5 girls from one team, 5 on the opposing team. 4 of them are blockers. One's a jammer. The jammers hang back a little bit. And that whistle blows, and it is the responsibility of those jammers to break through the pack. So it's both offense and defense at the same time.
Yeah.
So you've got your team trying to get you through the pack while the opposing team is trying to run you off the track. So you got to get past that pack. It's not until that next lap that you actually score. That's how that works there. In the 70s, there was a lot of drama on the track. It was almost like wrestling, professional wrestling. Lots of melodrama, lots of theatrics. And, I mean, there would just be thousands of people coming out to watch this stuff. So, and then it kind of went away for a while. And it kind of made a resurgence back in 2001. So there was a group of girls in Austin, Texas, that revived it. And they started we call it WIFDA for short, or WIFDA. That's Women's Flat Track Derby Association. And so now there's just hundreds of teams all over the country. I think roller derby is in like 33 countries.
Oh, wow.
I think it's an amazing sport because there's a little bit of drama. Full contact. Such a camaraderie, though, from the women. This sport started in the late 1930s, and now it's evolved to what it is today. And I'm just so glad that it survived through the decades. And like I said, the camaraderie, the sportsmanship is just amazing. Like, we'll go out and kick each other's butts on the track,
right?
And then later we're having beers with these women.
Yeah.
Like, we're best buds. So
I've actually watched you play without knowing that it was you.
Yeah.
A long time ago. It's fun.
Yeah.
You watch these chicks out there and hip checking and knocking chicks over. And
my roller derby name was Chrissy Creeper. Jammer. But the punny names for these women, you gotta give them credit for the stuff that they come up with. I mean, how there's Pabst ribbon.
Pabst Blue Ribbon.
Blue Ribbon beers. There's a gal named Pabst Smear.
Wow.
And Dixie Normus.
Wow.
And just so many other really cool punny ones. But yeah, I'll never forget my Derby sisters. I mean, amazing.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. So for this segment of our show, we are joined today by Jeannie Gaffigan, a funny woman of faith, a writer, actress, director, producer, philanthropist, and mom to 5 children. 6 if you count her Hot Pocket-obsessed husband, Jim Gaffigan. Hot Pocket! Thank you so much, Jeannie, for joining us on our humble little podcast.
Jose, I'm thrilled to be here.
Oh, it's truly a blessing. I'm like giddy that you're here. Before we begin, let's break the ice. I have a few lightning round questions for you. Question 1, who is your favorite comedian besides Jim?
Marina Franklin.
Ooh, okay, before I move on, who is she? I don't know who she is.
Marina is a female comedian, obviously, and she is a African American comedian who is just a long time friend of mine from New York. And the first time we really became friends is she was working on the Jim Gaffigan show, and she did pretty much like a silent bit. Like, I think she had a few lines, but she did this thing where she was walking a dog, and Jim was digging through a garbage can looking for something. And she just kind of did like reactions to him. It was amazing. And but I knew her comedy, and I knew, like, we had kind of offered her the part based on, you know, her sort of, you know, funniness. She just really recently did a comedy special called Single Black Female, and it was you know, she just does a lot of really funny things about she's like, you know, I'm trying to be woke, but you know, it's just so exhausting. Like, wait, now I can't wear Nikes? Like, she just does a lot of really great topical, edgy comedy, and I just really like her style. Very different from Jim.
Thank you. I'm going to have to check her out. All right, question 2. Guilty pleasure movie.
Labyrinth.
Question 3. Book that you would recommend to someone to read.
I think that everyone should read Pope Francis's Let Us Dream, and it's not just because I'm, you know, a crazy Catholic. It is like one of the most simple, beautiful messages, and it's written in response to the pandemic, so it's very current, and it's kind of giving us a kind of an opportunity to do a kind of refreshing of our sort of way of life. It's super easy to read, and it's a beautiful book.
I need to read that book. It's on my list. I love Austin Ivory as well.
I have to tell you, it's not one of those things where it's like, oh, I got to read this book. It's like you get it, and it's so clear and beautiful and, you know, well done. It's really well done, and I just love it.
Oh, it's on my list. Question 4, nickname.
Luigi.
Where does that come from?
I cannot really remember exactly the first time that I was called Luigi, but I think it was the first time we went to Rome. You know, Jim is very silly. So he just started calling me Luigi, like he thought it was my Italian name. I don't know why. Probably because my name is actually Jeannie Louise. And so I think he was just calling me maybe Jeannie Luigi, and then somehow it turned into Luigi. When I was a kid, my aunt had a dog named Luigi. So I think I told him about that. And I was like, I associate Luigi with the dog. And we also had always this joke where if one of us was mad at the other one, we were in the doghouse. So it kind of morphed together because I would be like, is Luigi in the doghouse? And then one of our first recorded albums was called Luigi's Doghouse that I produced. And so that's kind of like, and then also by the way, this year for Christmas, he gave me a necklace that says Luigi.
Yeah,
so
wow.
This is a serious nickname. I'm Luigi.
That's awesome. All right. Which one of the 7 dwarves do you maybe associate with?
Grumpy 100%.
Why grumpy? You don't strike me as a grumpy person.
I am. I'm super grumpy. And I'm like, you know, I think that probably I try to hide it, but like people in my close circle know that I'm grumpy. I am grumpy and Jim is dopey.
That's good.
I mean, there has to be, and the grumpy and dopey combo is great.
Yeah, that's a good balance. It's good balance. I like that. Final question. If you could ask God a question, what would it be?
Is my husband getting in?
Those are the people I want to bump into in heaven, be like, hey, remember me? You're here? Yeah, Peter loves my stuff.
That's the same question I'm sure my wife would ask.
I mean, I didn't assume I was getting in. I just want to know if he's getting in.
Yeah.
If he's getting in, I'm probably getting in.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're a shoo-in. If he's getting in, you're a shoo-in. Yeah. Well, thank you for breaking the ice. So I just want to start from the beginning of your life. Like, where are you from originally? What was your life like growing up? What was your childhood like?
Well, I am from Milwaukee, and both of my parents were from elsewhere. It's kind of funny. I just thought of this now, is when I moved to New York, I was sort of an outsider, right? Moving to New York, being from Milwaukee. Like, you think it's like a joke. It's like, where are you from? Milwaukee? And I'm like, yeah, as a matter of fact, I am from Milwaukee. But also, since my parents were both from elsewhere, also when I was growing up in Milwaukee, I was kind of weird there too, right? Because I had a different, I wasn't born and raised in Wisconsin, even though I was. But I wasn't like from a generation that was, right? So my mom was from a super conservative Catholic, Irish Catholic family, from New York, and then eventually Palm Beach, Florida, and Naples, Florida. My mom's family were definitely immigrants, but Irish, immigrants that came to New York and Ellis Island, and then the next generation. My mom's father was born in the United States. My father's parents were not born in the United States. They were born in Europe, in Germany and Italy. And so my grandmother on my dad's side was Jewish. And her husband, my grandfather on my father's side, was a Lutheran. I say Lutheran, but I just figured he was Lutheran because he was definitely not Catholic. And he was a anti-Nazi movement leader. And so he was in big trouble with the Gestapo back in the 40s. And then he married a Jewish woman, which was like a big no-no. He and my grandmother were heavily pursued by the Gestapo. And they wound up being separated in hiding. And one of the underground networks of hiding Jews and people who the Nazis were after were an order of Dominican priests, Catholic priests. So my grandmother was hidden in a Dominican rectory, and she had two small children. My grandfather would sneak in and visit her occasionally. So eventually she became pregnant with her third child, and the priests were like, because she was like sort of posing as like a housekeeper, a gardener, people in the neighborhood knew that the priest, there was a woman around cleaning or whatever. And the priests were like, look, you're pregnant. You can't, we gotta, they don't. So anyway, they arranged for her to get to Paris and get to meet my grandfather and get to to New York. So in New York, after they had wound up getting out of Nazi Germany, my father was born in New York, and his name is Dominic because of the Dominican priests. And so when they converted to Catholicism then. So that's a really cool story there. But very important in my kind of background story is that my parents met at Marquette University, which is a Jesuit university, which is very, I went to Marquette too. So it's kind of which is in Milwaukee, right? That's how Milwaukee became a thing. It's really influenced my Catholicism, like my Jesuit education, and also my parents being educated in Jesuit education. And my grandfather was actually a professor at Marquette University. The one who was the writer who wrote against the Nazis. And even more significant is that my mother's parents were wildly against the marriage of my father and my mother because he had Jewish blood. So that was a little, now I identify it as racism. I think eventually they came around, but now as an adult, when I look back at some of the, sort of mindset of that time and what the world that my mother left, which was a very sort of lily white community, I realized that, it was a racist situation.
Hearing about your parents and their background and kind of the religious theme there, which one of your parents, both of them, how did they impart their faith to you, your Catholic faith?
My wife's really Catholic. She's like a Shiite Catholic.
Very differently. My mother was really an over-the-top spiritualist. My mother had gigantic statues of she had a huge altar of the Virgin Mary in her living room, which was very not normal. Most people, unless they were in a very if their parents were straight from a different country, right? they would have like statues and be like, oh, okay, that's an ethnic thing, you know? But in my mom was just like, we just have all the saints around us, and the Mother Mary is the, she was very, very over the top. And my father was very quiet about it, but still obviously didn't say you can't have the Virgin Mary in the living room. And so my mother was always singing, prayers, and she was always talking about God and angels, and doing this Michael the Archangel prayer like every day before we went to school. And if we were like, someone's being mean to me, she would say a quote from, let no weapon formed against thee prosper. Like she'd always have these moments of wisdom. My father, who was a super intellectual, like much more quiet and kind of in a very Jewish way, right? He has that very like secular Jewish way about him, where he's very intellectual about everything. But he played the banjo at the Newman Center, and he always sang in the choir at Jesu Church. He loved the music, and he wrote songs about the Holy Spirit, and it was in a folk song kind of way. So we had a very eclectic upbringing. I'm the oldest of 9 children.
Wow, so 9 kids. That's amazing.
So everyone's like, oh my gosh, you have 5 kids. I'm like, that's nothing.
Yeah. You ever watch Wayne's World? I always think of that moment in Wayne's World, Milwaukee.
Actually, it's pronounced Milwaukee, which is Algonquin for the good land.
I was not aware of that.
And then they go through the explanation of, I guess, the native origins of that word, the etymology of Milwaukee.
Milwaukee has certainly had its share of visitors. The French missionaries and explorers were coming here as early as the late 1600s to trade with the Native Americans.
But, sorry, tangent.
No, I have to look that up, though, because I love Wayne's World. I haven't thought about that in years.
That's how my brain works. But what was your childhood like? Like, what did you do as a kid growing up in Milwaukee?
Growing up in Milwaukee was really cool because we were right on the edge of the city. So, Milwaukee is a very segregated city. So it's like the white people live over here and the black people live over here. But where I lived was right, like there was downtown, and then we were right around UW Milwaukee. So if anyone is listening to this is from Milwaukee, they're going to know exactly where I live, on the east side of Milwaukee. We had this great neighborhood where there was just tons and tons of kids. And we didn't have these things where we would have to arrange play dates and stuff like that. You know what I mean? You just went out and we climbed trees, and we were in the city, but we were also kind of in the, had a yard, and, we'd run around the neighborhood and play games. And there was a group of teenagers, and we'd like prank them, and there were little kids, and there were all these like different generations of kids. And it was a really wonderful experience growing up. And it was also somewhat diverse in that neighborhood. And we also lived in between 2 different Catholic parishes, St. Peter and Paul, which was more of the blue collar Catholics, and St. Robert's, which was more of the like affluent conservative Catholics. And so when you have a big family and everyone has all these activities and everything, or you were late, it would decide which mass you went to. And so when I was a kid, I always wanted to go to the St. Robert's Mass because I liked the clothes better, right? I was like, oh, I want to see all what everyone's wearing, I didn't really get that, like, it was nicer, right? And now I was like, wow, St. Peter and Paul was really where it was happening. I mean, I remember being like, Dad, can't we be Republicans like the rich people? I was a kid. I didn't understand what was going on. And then also, I did not go to Catholic school, even though both of those parishes had schools. I went to this school in inner city Milwaukee that was 60% African American, and it still is called Rufus King High School. You should Google it and see like what the racial makeup was. It was a utopia. We were really mixed at that school, and for sure there was like the black social ladder and the white social ladder, definitely, but at a certain point, you had this sort of understanding where there was no like, this one's better than that one or whatever, unless you were, a better athlete or a better student. I mean, it was like not about race, right? Or the construct of race. So I really was shocked when I went to college and I found out that, racism was such a huge thing. I was shocked because I was in a bubble. that's just something that I continue to learn because I never want to offend anyone, but there were things that we said for a long time. You'll remember that people were saying African American only, right? They were saying, "Oh, my African American friend." And for me, it was like so weird to say that because I had never said that in my whole life, but I didn't want to offend anyone. So, but every time I said, "Oh, my African American friend," I was like, who am I saying this for? Because I don't know if my
Yeah.
black friends would be offended or they'd be like, I fine with black. So
Yeah.
it always put me in kind of a weird situation, my very eclectic upbringing.
No, I've had similar experiences here in my community growing up using those words. Like, is this the right one? I'm not sure. Yeah. As I was looking into kind of your background, I was also struck that you were in Shakespeare festivals and you were in plays, in theater. Because, when I was in high school, I did 4 years of drama in theater. And so when I read that, I'm like, oh, cool. There was something there, a shared history.
Yeah.
Maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah, sure. Well, my father, getting back to my father, and actually my mother too, but that goes back to Marquette, they met in the theater at Marquette, which was a very serious program. And there's a lot of people out of that program that are, what wound up being household names. But my mother and father were very, passionate about the theater and, met in the theater. And growing up, my father was the theater critic at our paper, the Milwaukee Journal. And so as a kid, and he also taught film at Milwaukee, and he was a film critic too. So as a kid, I got exposed to all this theater because that was like what we would do with dad, right? Like dad would be like, okay, tonight Jeannie's going to go to the theater with me. And I wound up going on my first trip out of Milwaukee without my whole family was with my dad to the Stratford, Ontario Shakespeare Festival. And when I think about being like a 9-year-old, 10-year-old kid and what I was exposed to, it's very clear why I wound up, loving it so much. And then when I got to high school and I actually started studying Shakespeare, and then I remember in Dr. Stark's British Authors Honors class in my sophomore year, I just was so enamored with Shakespeare. I just thought it was so cool because we started to learn about like breaking down what it was. And then from an acting perspective, it's like, it's so current. Like everything about Shakespeare is so current, like those same emotions, the same relationships, the same kind of power structure. Think of even obscure Shakespearean plays like Timon of Athens. It's like literally, it's like Mitch McConnell is in that play. It's unbelievable what you can do. And so as I got older, Shakespeare became a passion of mine. Essentially, when I actually started off at UW-Madison because it was Marquette University is a private, expensive college. And I was the first kid. And my financial aid was not as good as the financial aid that when you have another kid in college, you get better financial aid for your other kids. And so I was the first one. So I went to our state school, which was UW-Madison. And it's an excellent school, by the way. It's amazing. All my professors were from Harvard and wonderful school. But I wanted to transfer into Marquette as a sophomore on a merit scholarship. So when I was at Marquette, I joined the theater program. In Marquette, you have to minor in philosophy or theology. And I remember that I did not have any credits from the state school because they had no theology classes. So I had to take a lot of classes. So I went to a school of communications, journalism, and performing arts. And then I minored in theology. So essentially, when I got there, I was coming in as a kind of a newbie in the middle. I was a junior. So at the end of my sophomore year is when I got the scholarship. And so I was in a kind of really established group of people. And although I did get a lot of stage experience there was one particular show that I was in, which was a Shakespearean production. I was already in the Scottish play at one point. And then the next year, I think was my senior year, and I had, sort of the hopes of being an actor in this, in Midsummer Night's Dream. I didn't get in. And so I wanted to join the crew and being the ASM on that show, assistant stage manager, which was something I hadn't done. But when you go to school for theater, you have to do the crews, right? If you don't you have to be involved in the production. And it turned out to be one of the greatest experiences of my life because I was involved in every single aspect of that production and I understood every single role in the production. It was like so fascinating that I was like, I want to direct Shakespeare. That's what I want to do when I grow up. So my first job, I started to take the director's MFA at Marquette. And my first job I was hired for was to direct the fall play at my high school as a visiting director. And so I chose to play Midsummer Night's Dream, which I had just ASM'd. I staged it in modern times. And it was with these high school kids. And it was so great. It was such a great experience. And then I was going back to Marquette to continue my master's. And then I got chosen to be an understudy in a equity theater, the Milwaukee Repertory Theater. And I worked under this director who was brilliant. And he did this Brian Friel play called Dancing at Lunasa, where there was like dialect coach and choreographers. And it just was this whole other world of like a big budget regional theater. And they had actors coming in from New York. And I was like, wow, I have got to blow this popsicle stick and go to New York because this is what I want to do. But one of the things that I remember that this director, Joe Henry, did was he really focused on these amazing themes that in this play, and I could go on and on about this, but that's another, put it on your reading list. It's called Dancing at Lunasa. And it's about these sisters who live in Ireland in a very conservative, Catholic, rigid community. And their uncle, Jack, who's a priest, goes to Africa to like convert the Africans, right? He's convert the savages, right? That was his goal. And he gets malaria and has to come home. But within his like delirium, you realize that he has become part of the African culture and that his passion has become this thing that is now very fearful to the very rigid oldest sister who's like, no, that's pagan. That's pagan, But it's this like beautiful like religion. At the same time, in the mountains, there are still people who practice the Celtic religion, which is also a big no-no. So it's this like struggle between this rigid Catholic faith, the African culture, and the Irish Celtic culture. And it just blew my mind. I was like, this is so, because you read it on the page and you're like, you can take your art in a different way than you can with just doing it as an actor, right?
Yeah.
You have a vision of the whole production. So I got really, really amped about directing, even though I should have probably gone back to school and gotten my master's in directing. I just moved to New York and was like, I want to just do this.
Yeah, and then so you arrive in New York, and then I say you created, but I think maybe you would not agree with the word created. But you were part of maybe this 4-person sketch comedy group called King Baby?
Yeah, I created it as a co-creator. I don't want to say Gaffigan created it. I did create it. I was a founding member.
What kind of sketches did you perform? And then as you were in this, did you prefer the acting, the writing, the directing, or just being part of all of that?
Just a little bit of background. So when I moved to New York, I was doing a lot of stuff, okay? I was doing, let's go start humble. I was waitressing, okay? I was hooked up with a arts program because at that time, like the government had cut all this funding for public schools. And so a lot of arts organizations got together and would hire skilled artists from the community to come in for like an hourly rate and do workshops because like you didn't have art class anymore, right? But then you could have like a 6-week workshop with a visiting artist at the public schools. It was really great because I got to really learn the city, like go to the Bronx public schools, go just really see what the story was. So I was doing that. My brother, Vincent, had graduated from Carnegie Mellon University, which if you're, in acting, that they have like one of the finest, acting programs and MFA programs in, the country. So he had hooked me up with a bunch of his friends that were living in New York and doing theater. And so I wound up getting together with them and becoming part of a grassroots theater company where it was all original plays. I didn't direct there. I was an actor in that. But I mean, it was like people who got an MFAs in like stagecraft and art and directing and acting and playwriting. So I was in that, and that was called Assembly. And then at the same time, I was auditioning, and I ended up teaching drama, and reading at a Catholic school in my neighborhood. So what happened is that I was in improv classes, and then out of improv classes, normally you meet a bunch of friends and you go and you do an improv group. So I started doing a lot of, shows around New York, improv shows, which led me to audition for like sketch groups. And I started doing sketch comedy and seeing a lot of comedy, not stand-up comedy. That came later. So I saw this woman who was a little bit older than me, who was so polished and so funny, doing a one-woman show. And she had these amazing comic monologues that were laugh out loud funny. But what was different about her, because at that time, a lot of the female performers were really talking about very, I don't want to say edgy, but it was like sort of kind of filthy, right? Like very personal things about women that were not talked about, right? That was funny. And I was just kind of not into that, but that was the way it was. So this girl was rip-roaring funny, and her whole thing was about her struggling relationship with God, which in my opinion was the edgiest thing ever, because it was like much cooler to be like, yeah, there is no God, let me talk about my naked body or whatever. So I waited for her after the show, and I was like, I have to say that I am blown away by your talent, and you are so incredible. And I was like nobody. I was like a kid who didn't, I didn't have any influence or anything like that. And she was so kind to me, and we got each other's email addresses, and we wound up like getting coffee together, and then we wound up writing a sketch together. And it turned out she was part of this church that was non-denominational, like probably like evangelical, some kind of churches. And she was in this like young people's group, right? And so I was going to Catholic mass like by myself with all these like 90-year-old Italian grandmas. And I didn't have any like friends to talk about God with, right? I had my theater company, and there was mostly like atheists and this and that, which is no judgment, but I never had a peer group until this woman brought me to, I was very much like, I'm not joining your church, okay? But I started going to these like cool, like kind of like worship, things with a bunch of Christians, and met these really, really funny people. And so this woman's name is Susan Isaacs, and she wound up introducing me to these two hilarious guys who were at this church as well, who she was like, I want to do a sketch with them and improv with these guys. One was Todd Wilkerson, who's the nephew of David Wilkerson, who's like this famous pastor who started Title Fair Church, and Tony Hill, which you might know as Buster from Arrested Development, or the personal assistant on VP, which is like everyone knows this guy. So, but at the time, we were all just kids in New York. And Todd is also a working actor, and Susan's also a working actor. So, but at the time, we just started writing these sketches about, they weren't all like had God in them, but some of them were, Susan is an amazing writer, and she had this one called Couples Therapy, where she shows up at this couples therapist alone, and he's like, so is your husband here? She's like, well, it's not really my husband. He's like, boyfriend? She's like, well, not really. You wouldn't call it boyfriend. He's like, well, who are you here to have couples therapy with? And she's like, God. I'm here to have couples therapy with God. So the therapist is kind of like, okay, God is not here. And she's like, no, he's here. He's here. And he's like, okay, well, what kind of problems do you have with him? She's like, I always feel like I'm kind of just like talking to myself. It's like, I feel like he wants me to do things that I don't want to do. Like she had this laundry list that is total classic, like what a woman would say about a man, or a man would say about a woman. And then he was like, listen, I just have to break it to you. God is not real. And then God walks in, right? And he's like, oh, sorry, I'm late. And he sits down and he's like, okay. He's like, again with the complaining, like, and it was just really good. And then later, as it goes to like Act 3, all of a sudden, like Jesus walks in. And he's like, hey, Dad. And he's like, hey, son. And then he's like, hey, Susan, how you doing? And he's much sweeter and more, it was just so funny. And I was like, oh my gosh, I just love this so much. And, we did shows every Friday night in New York, and King Baby was the name of the group.
I love that. That is hilarious. That's the kind of content I'm looking for in my life right there. I love hearing your story, your life story here, because I don't know that many people of faith who are in theater, and like you don't really come across too many. So I love hearing your story. Your story at one point intersects with a fellow named, trying to remember, James Gaffigan or something.
He is Garrigan.
Durgan, something of that in that realm. How did you two intersect? Where did you guys meet? Where did you guys become collaborators?
I want to just push my book for a second. I wrote a book called When Life Gives You Pears, about my experience with the brain tumor.
Yes.
And my, how it sort of deepened my faith and my love of everything pretty much. But I tell this story, so I don't want to be redundant. So I'm not going to, give everything away. But I tell the actual meeting story and the courtship story in the book. But for the purposes of answering your question, I have now at this point been living in the Little Italy area of New York City. Now it's called Nolita. It's a beautiful area, and it's right near Chinatown, and there's Little Italy, and then there's this whole block on Mott Street between Houston and Prince that is St. Patrick's Old Cathedral, which was the first cathedral in New York. And the school, which is now closed, but it was an orphanage where St. Elizabeth Ann Seton started her orphanage. And it's a few blocks away from where the Catholic Worker, where Dorothy Day did her thing. So we're talking like history here.
Yeah.
I'm in this neighborhood. It has a wall around it. This church is a big red brick wall. If you Google search it, you'll see it. It's just incredible because it had a wall because people hated Catholics, right? So anyway, so Jim lives on the same block. So for 5 years, we are passing each other on the street. So it's like that person you pass on the street, you never talk to, but you nod because you're like, okay, now it's just awkward not to nod. So anyway, one time I was doing a sketch or a improv or something and this is because King Baby was before Jim, right? That was way back in the day. So I was at Stand Up New York doing a festival where there was agents there or something, oh, there's gonna be agents there. So I go and I'm doing the sketch and I'm signed up for whatever the 9:45 p.m. slot. And this comedian walks in. It was a sketch night, right? It wasn't a stand-up night. And he talks to the guy who's running the MC and they're like, oh yeah, you go on. And just takes the slot that we have. And I'm like, who's this guy? How did he just walk in? Right? Because Jim's not on TV or anything like that. So essentially, he gets up and does this amazing bit about this manatee, and it was one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life. And I was like, oh my God, that is the guy who lives on my block. So then the next time I saw him, I said, I saw you at Stand Up New York, because that's way on the Upper West Side, a 25-30-minute subway ride away from where I live. It's not close. And then also someone in my group was like, yeah, he's a really great comedian. He's known stand-up comedian in New York. And he was really funny. So anyway, I had a chat with him about that. And then several times we ran into each other, right? And we have a couple exchanges oh, how are you? Whatever. And then one day I was directing Midsummer Night's Dream because at this point I had started a theater company in my neighborhood with these really wild 8th graders at St. Patrick's School. These kids were very, mom and dad weren't home after school. You know what I mean? They were on the street. They were doing their thing. They were not disciplined, but it was great because they had the perfect energy for Shakespeare, right? Remember I talking about high school? These kids were full of life and full of hormones. And so I would do these productions with these kids, and I have a hip hop score and I have a DJ, and they learned literacy through these plays. I was Miss Jeannie, it was great. When you look at Shakespeare, I just harken back to this, the iambic pentameter that it's written in really lends itself really well to a hip hop musical. So, like, if you think about Midsummer Night's Dream, like, you look at, like, Puck's speech, it's like, if we shadows have offended, think but this and all is mended, that you have but slumbered here while these visions did appear, right? It just goes. So the kids would learn the whole thing. Whereas if you put a kid in a library and be like, memorize this Shakespearean speech,
Yeah, no.
so then they'd be like, Miss Jeannie, what does this mean? What does that mean? I'm like, well, this is what this means.
Yeah.
Because it's like a different language, right? Shakespeare's like a different language. So I was doing this crazy production of Midsummer Night's Dream at the St. Patrick's Gym, and with all these like Dominican kids who were like amazing actors, like never trained, but they got it. They just got it. They weren't around because it was like 9:30 at night, but me and some other professionals who worked in New York were setting up the tech, right? So we were hanging lights and, getting everything ready for the next day. And we were out of like tape or something. And I ran to the Korean market down the block like a crazy woman, gathered up all this tape and stuff. In New York, you can just find anything at any time of the night. And I came running out of there and I crashed into Jim. He was coming in probably after a gig or something. And I was like, oh, hi, how are you? And he was like, I'm sorry, do I know you? And I'm like, are you kidding? And he's like, no. He's like, really, I just am really bad with, my glasses on or whatever. And I'm like, you're so arrogant. I'm like, I've known you for years. We've talked. And I like kind of let him have it. And I'm like, you're arrogant. Like, you're arrogant. You got a lot of nerve. And then he was like, you and I are probably going to get married.
Wow.
And I was like, yeah, in your wildest dreams.
Wow.
In your wildest dreams. And then it just kind of like that whole little fight, like, kind of endeared us to each other, right? And eventually I went out to lunch with him and, it turned out he's from 6 kids and, and I was like, I've never seen you at church. And he's like, yeah, I've never been in that church. I'm like, it's across the street from your house. He's like, yeah, I hear the bells go off all the time. I'm like, why aren't you in mass? And he's like, because it's too early. I'm like, they have a 12:30 mass. He's like, yeah, that's too early. Sunday. So I'm like, come on, we're going to mass.
She brings me to church every Sunday. If you've never been to a Catholic mass, that is the longest experience of your life.
So it was just kind of this fun courtship, and then we just started working together. He got booked on a sitcom. I was like, I'll break down these scenes with you. We'll work on the scenes. And that's when it became very clear that we were like really good at working together. And then I started, producing his albums. Like I talked to Luigi's Doghouse is the first one. It comes back to that. Then we had 5 kids the next day.
The next day, yeah. Here you go. So, the two of you discover that you have this magic, right? Working together, collaborating. You guys have done 7 stand-up comedy specials, correct? And you've been Grammy and Emmy Award nominated for all of your work. Which of these projects with Jim would you say you're the most proud of?
First of all, when I look back, I don't want to I don't want to look back and say I'm not proud of any of it, right? Because I'm really proud of everything. But like when I was directing his specials, or even with the Emmy-nominated Pale Force, which my brother Paul, who's a cartoonist at the New Yorker, was the creator of. And he and Jim were the creators, and I was not the creator of it, right? So the Emmy nomination was for something that wasn't mine, right? And my work with Jim and all the Grammy nominations, I mean, that's mostly Jim, right? I'm just I'm humble about this, okay? Jim is a star, right? I am a director and I'm a producer and I work really hard and I put these things together, but I don't want to steal his thunder at all. He is a genius. However, and even with the 2 New York Times best-selling books that he wrote, and I was a story editor on, it's still his point of view. The comedy, his point of view. Pale Force was my brother Paul Nolt's idea. The Jim Gaffigan show, however, was the most balanced collaboration that we ever had. The Jim Gaffigan show was like, Jim was in like every scene, right? He was the actor, the star of the show, and we did write together. But Jeannie Gaffigan was a character on that show. The Catholic priest was a character on that show, right? So it was the most balanced symbiosis of the two of us creatively out of any of it. What I'm the most particularly proud of is the season finale of season 2 of the Jim Gaffigan Show. It's called The Mike Gaffigan Show, and it's all done when Jim was a child. And my son, Jack, who, by the way, is now 15 years old, so that's how time flies, and this is pre-brain tumor, plays young Jim, and Jim plays his father. And the theme of the Mike Gaffigan Show is fatherhood. And not only are there so many Easter eggs in that show, like if you are like a serious like comedy nerd and you are a big fan of like the Jim Gaffigan Show, there are so many Easter eggs in that show. And there's personal Easter eggs that nobody would ever know. And if, for those of you who don't know, an Easter egg is when you plant little things that mean other things in the scene. So because it's about Jim's childhood, I had photographs of all the real Gaffigan kids in the show. And there was a certain point where all the actor kids who played the Gaffigan siblings with the same names as the Gaffigan siblings were on those like school pictures up the stairs. You know how people have them that going up the stairs, they're like, here's Billy and here's Johnny and here's Mary, and they're all in the school picture. So we had a school picture of actual Jim from like the 70s, right? And then we sat the rest of the actor kids in a mock school photo and put them up the stairs in the house. This is like a 2-second, but it took so long to do. It's a 2-second shot. But the only real photograph on that stair display is the real Jim. And then the rest of them are the actor kids, but it's staged as if it was all like picture day in the 70s. There's so many beautiful things that were so creative and so fun to do and so meaningful. And then plus having, you know, my son, Jack, was the lead. That was a really amazing time with him. My daughter, Mari, played her Aunt Pam in it. And then all of my kids ended up being in like some of the flashback sequences. So I'm super proud of that because it was a whole family thing. It was completely collaboration, and it took a really long time to do because when you are shooting block style, like it was a very, very difficult production schedule. Usually when one show is filming, you're prepping the next episode, which is usually why you have guest directors come in. So because I was on set being the showrunner every single show of the whole season, I had to prep this show the entire season because it was like a vintage everything. Like everything was really from the 70s, or, you know, it was set in Jim's childhood and had a whole flashback sequence. And it was pretty much what I'm the most proud of. And I hope all of you see it because it was really great.
Yeah, okay. I'm just going to tell you right now, I loved the Jim Gaffigan Show. I was so bummed it was only 2 seasons, but I understand that you wanted to spend more time with your family at that point. But I'm like,
any time with my family at that point because it got really. I mean, that was a schedule that was unmanageable.
Unmanageable, yeah.
When you have 2 people in a marriage, you take turns, right? So, like right now, you're working outside the home, and your wife is working in the home, and you got a 2-year-old, right? But imagine that you're both working, and you don't have mama or abuela or a good person. You know, it's like it was too much. I was like, I can't. At a certain point, you're not going to be able to be honest because you're writing a show about your family and your experiences with your family, but you're not with them anymore.
Yeah.
So I had this flash that I'm like, if this continues, my kids are going to end up being raised by someone else, and I'm going to be literally making up stories about these wonderful, beautiful things that created this show in the first place. So, yeah.
That is so true. That is so true. But I'm glad that you guys had that realization because I can imagine that would be difficult to walk away, basically.
Well, I also have to say one more thing that's really important too, is that if we hadn't, I would not be having this conversation right now with you because literally I did not go to the doctor or take my kids to the doctor that entire time I was running that show. So even though we did, like immediately, we produced a show. I don't know if you know, if you're following the comedy specials, we produced a show right after that show.
Yeah.
We produced another show. But I had more flexibility. So when I took my kids to get their well child visits, that's when my doctor, who is still my doctor now, noticed that I was having like hearing and balance problems. And I was not even at the doctor for myself. I was with my kids for their visit. And she was like, I want you to get that checked out. And I was like, oh, it's fine.
All right, so great conversation with Jeannie Gaffigan. Hope you all enjoyed that. Again, stay tuned next week, part 2 of that conversation. In our final segment here, Christina and I are going to share something that we've been reading or watching or listening to or what have you. What have you been listening to, babe?
So for me, it's listening.
Mm-hmm.
I love Iration, as you know, the band Iration. They're amazing. I might have talked about them before, but they had an album drop. I think it was July 2020, last year, and the title of the album is called Coastin'. And they're like a Cali reggae rock band. And this album, from like start to finish, is amazing. Chill. You can just listen to it driving down the coast, taking a drive, doing whatever. It's one of those albums that kind of like takes you away. And yeah, I'm just digging it. I love it. It's so good. I was bummed because it's stupid COVID. But I wanted to see them at the Santa Barbara Bowl again, because in 2019 we went to the Santa Barbara Bowl and watched them close out their tour that year.
That was for your birthday.
That was for my birthday, yes. The band went to school in Santa Barbara. A lot of the members are from Hawaii. So it was really amazing for them to close out their show in Santa Barbara. And then for us to be there for it was just... Had a little incident in the bathroom as we were leaving with one of the concert goers. Everyone's drinking and, smoking the wacky tobacco. There's always a line, especially in the women's bathroom, And there's this one chick that was just blocking traffic, self-absorbed in the mirror. And I'm like thinking to myself as I'm leaving, she's not going to move. And she knows it, like she wants to make whoever walks by her say something to her. So going back to my derby days, I kind of just walk by her and hip check her a little bit. And, I got some hips, so she moved, not by choice.
Yeah.
And so I left. And, you and my brother and my sister was there.
Yeah.
We didn't leave fast enough because this chick came out and she was pissed. And so she proceeds to cuss me out, all this stuff. And, I just totally deflect. I was like, you're right. I'm so sorry. I totally bumped into you. That was my bad. I'm kind of placating her. And I'm like, oh my God, like, I'm a mom now. I'm a mom and like, I'm at a concert and I'm like almost getting into fisticuffs with like some 20-something like year old.
Right.
I cannot be doing this.
Well, to be fair, that chick was pretty horrible.
Yeah, she wasn't very nice, but
say
lovey.
You got to keep your derby skills sharp.
I guess, yeah.
But hopefully, COVID's wrapped up. I think concerts and concert venues are going to open back up.
I can't wait.
So hopefully the Santa Barbara Bowl, which is one of the best places to see a show, will open up soon, and we will be able to watch Iration. They're on tour right now with 311.
Yeah.
I'm not big into the reggae music.
Oh, God.
Yeah. A reggae band. Reggae? Yeah, reggae.
I think I got a little contact high.
I mean, that's not surprising.
But it was enjoyable. I enjoy being in the crowd. I like grooving to the music with you. So good times.
It's good music.
Yeah. I'm going to talk about this movie, Without Remorse. Tom Clancy's Without Remorse. It stars Michael B. Jordan, who you might know from films like Creed. He was Killmonger in the Black Panther movie.
He's very hot right now.
He's super hot right now.
He's super hot.
He's super hot right now. But this movie, which I thought was really cool that they connected it to the Jack Ryan series. So they're in the same universe. This, the Jack Ryan television show on Amazon.
Which is amazing.
And we've talked about it on the podcast. It's in that universe. So, while John Krasinski's out there, Jim from The Office is out there.
God, dude, drop the Jim from The Office thing. Like, he's proven already that he is badass, okay?
All right, fine. But dead dad from A Quiet Place
God.
is in that show.
You're killing me.
Without remorse, though. So, Michael B. Jordan, he's part of this, I don't know if it's a SEAL team.
Yes.
But they're involved in covert operations. And they cross paths. I believe they're Russian.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the CIA.
True.
The CIA guy that was kind of giving them their mission.
Yes. So the whole movie basically kicks off with intruders in Michael B. Jordan's, not actually Michael B. Jordan's home, into the character's home.
Nice recovery.
Yeah. And they kill his wife, who's pregnant. And so they almost...
Spoiler alerts.
It's the beginning of the movie.
Oh my God.
I'm sorry. His pregnant wife may or may not survive the intrusion.
So, I'm sure our listeners are like, oh, this sounds lovely.
It's a great movie. It's called Without Remorse for a reason. So they killed the man's wife.
Okay. I'll give you that.
And unborn child. And so he then is on like a mission to hunt down who those people are that did the invasion. And by the way, he was almost killed in that invasion, that home invasion.
Mm-hmm.
And it's crazy. Michael B. Jordan is so good with acting.
The physicality.
The physicality.
Yes.
He's very physical. The action shots, the shooting of the guns.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's very intense. Not to give too many spoilers, but there's a scene where he basically rams into a vehicle, sets it on fire, and while the car's on fire, he gets into it so he can interrogate one of the suspects.
Yeah.
While the car's on fire.
Yeah. It's pretty badass.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you want to watch a badass action movie starring one of the hottest actors in multiple senses.
One of the hottest actors?
One of the hottest actors. The hottest actor right now? Who's the hottest actor right now?
I don't know. Michael B. Jordan?
Okay. Check out Tom Clancy's Without Remorse on Amazon Prime. All right, that's all for this week. Thank you so much for joining us on our humble little podcast. You could do us a huge favor by subscribing to our show wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Stitcher, Podbean, Google Podcasts, or Apple Podcasts. And be sure to rate our show and leave a review. Your rating will help others find this show. And be sure to find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Conversation on Tap. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next week. Cheers, babe.
Cheers.
Salud.